To drive one of London's famous black cabs, you need to be a special kind of person. London's cabbies don't use GPS, but then they don't need it. They have the knowledge.
I have undertaken the stiffest geographical test that any transport operative has to go through probably anywhere in the world. It consists of memorising straight line routes across London. You learn something like 25,000 streets. Left this street, right this street, forward this roundabout, leave by this exit. Probably 100,000 points of interest.
On average, it takes 4.5 years to complete the knowledge, and only 1 in 7 students passes. Those expert navigators that do are remarkable specimens. They're even studied by scientists. And while all our brains are excellent at decoding our surroundings, good design makes navigating a whole lot easier in complex places like cities. This is all part of a process called wayfinding.
Wayfinding is about finding your way while you're interacting with your surroundings.
The environment can help us or can hinder us. The information that you've got can be useful or it can be absent.
From the roads we drive, the paths we walk, to negotiating busy airports and shopping malls, carefully designed wayfinding systems are everywhere. But in a world where GPS is in all of our pockets, do we risk losing our innate ability to find our way?
Wayfinding is kind of the opposite of being lost. So when you know where you're going or you work out how you go somewhere, then you are actually using the process of wayfinding. It is innate in humans. As creatures, we come from the savannah, and we always needed to know where our food was, where water was, where the camp was. So our ability to navigate is kind of fundamental to survival.
Humans are spatial beings. Our brains give us an internal compass to help us understand and navigate unfamiliar environments.
Neuroscientists talk about the cognitive map, which is the map that we have in our brain. It effectively works in the same way as a regular map, because it allows us to retain a memory and allows us, for example, to take shortcuts.
Research has found very specific types of cells in our hippocampus that fire in different locations within our environment. Place cells cover our environment with a firing pattern that we believe helps support the idea of a cognitive map, and as in we have this not just a physical representation of our environment that we can kind of see, but actually a neural representation of cells that fire in a pattern in our environment that helps us reduce the cognitive demand needed to actually travel from point A to point B. Likewise, grid cells are also found in this region, and they form a hexadirectional representation of a familiar learned environment. So for example, as I'm sitting in this room, I would have a grid-like pattern of cells that fire, that then kind of move as I move around the room. As you kind of think of it as like pointillism, kind of the combination of all of these different cells that fire for different places and for different directions that you're approaching, barriers and such in your environment, build up the idea that we have this cognitive map.
Despite the brilliance of our brains, it's still very easy to get lost in our busy, ever-changing cities.
Cities are very stressful places. There's a lot of noise, tall buildings, people around. London is notorious for being a difficult place to find your way through, and people do get lost in it all the time.
I couldn't find any of my landmarks. It provoked horror. I was lost, I really was lost.
You want to end up in a place and you end up in another one. So I was late for work because of that.
London is a messy city. Compare it to something like New York. One reason is the sheer scale. It's a very big city. It was not designed as a city at the beginning, a series of different settlements. Manhattan is a lot easier as a city to navigate than London because of that consistent uniform grid system. When people get lost, they basically run out of clues to help them orientate themselves.
Point north. Okay.
Is it that way?
The Thames is that.
No. The other way.
Oh.
I'm gonna go that way. It's close enough.
Navigating in London is so difficult that 44% of those walking above ground actually use a map of the Underground, London's tube.
It's very accessible. The tube map is an excellent device for understanding London's whole structure and how to connect and use it across the city. It's a shorthand. It gives you a picture of the city. It gives you a confidence, but it's not a great device for walking around.
The difficulty is when people use the tube map to navigate when they get above ground, because it's not a reflection of how the city is laid out.
We found that there's a lot of people getting lost. There was a lot of people who didn't travel places because they didn't think they could. When you look down a street and it doesn't look very interesting, or whatever is at the end of it isn't very visible, you will naturally think, maybe I won't go down there, let's not adventure. Well, the next street could be full of wonderful, interesting, bohemian stores that you want to go and see, but because you can't see it, you don't know it exists, and you don't go down there. And the city, therefore, is a quite dark place until you get to know it, and then you know those little shortcuts, you know something is round the corner, but that takes time for you to build a mental map and to understand it and have that confidence.
Applied Information Group is a design agency who specialise in fixing this very problem. They created a tool to help people get around the city centre. Legible London.
Legible London is London's walking system. It started really from the observation that walking around London, you don't get a lot of help in the last mile. The sign system is designed around answering 4 questions, no more than that. The first question is, where am I? So you'll see information at the top giving you the village that you're in and the area within that village. And there's a map with a large "you are here" to kind of, okay, so this is going to help me tell me where I am. Second question that it answers is, well, where is it? So we don't know what you're looking for, and this is the reason why it evolved as a mapping system rather than with lots of finger posts, because on a mapping system we can get between 200 and 250 locations on that map. The third question is, well, how do I get there? And that's why you see this very careful selection of landmarks which are highlighted that are designed to be placed along routes so that you can see that I need to go along here. And that's why we started to introduce 3D buildings, because we found just naming them and saying there is a church here wasn't doing enough. And then the fourth question, well, what else is around here? So that's why you had this wider area map that goes out to 5 minutes with a lot more detail, because it actually tells you that there are interesting streets around the corner, that, oh, I didn't know there was another tube station there. As you approach this, this sign with the map on it, it's quite obvious that I'm here, the way in which I'm facing. And if you look ahead, South Molton Street, that's South Molton Street. So immediately, I haven't had to think, and I'm orienting myself. The map at the top here gives me more of an idea of what's within 15 minutes. So if you can see the number of tube stations, there's about 9 of them there, within a 15-minute walk. And not a lot of people realise that these tube stations are as close as that. And it gives you the basic directions in order to get there using these pathways which were decided very carefully. And then as you're travelling, we'll be guiding you by finding other ones of these signs along the way. We also, from research, know that remembering street names is very hard to do. The reason being is that street names are quite abstract and they don't create an image in your mind, and your memory works so much better when you create an image. You know, one of those secrets of learning people's names is as soon as you meet somebody, you meet a Kevin, just think of Kevin Bacon, and then when you meet them next you think, why am I thinking Kevin Bacon? Oh, your name's Kevin. That's how the brain works, so that's why street names are poor. We just ended up redacting, taking things out. How can we make this as simple as possible? Because there's so much information on that map, it's so detailed, it can become overwhelming very, very quickly. It takes a lot of iteration to get that balance right, to get all of these things in play. I think we went through about 293 different iterations to resolve the whole design. The colours on the map were probably one of the hardest things to try and resolve. Big learning there is to try and reduce the number of colours that you're using. We came up with the use of blue. It's a colour that works well in UK's overcast skies. We wanted them to be like you can spot them from a distance, and that's where the idea of a yellow bar at the top came from. It was higher up, it was kind of yellow in the environment, it kind of speaks to about information and can be very visible. And all the research that we did showed, not by a huge factor, but the power of the Transport for London's typeface, Johnston, the kind of respect that it had for giving me transport information. Being part of the transport system and using Johnston Underground makes more logical sense.
In the Spears Lab at University College London, neuroscientists Sarah and Chris are running an experiment on cab driver James.
So the next thing we're going to run is a very exciting scan for us. It's the high-resolution picture of your hippocampus. Would you like to begin?
Anytime you're ready.
All right, perfect.
They're hoping to learn about how our brains change by studying expert wayfinders.
We're taking a much more detailed look at the cabby hippocampus than has ever been done before. It is helping us to learn how the cabby hippocampus grows. The task that we have taxi drivers perform is very similar to the job that they do on a daily basis.
The game will begin again in a few seconds with another 15 routes.
Okay.
We essentially have them do a route planning task where we tell them a point A to a point B, ask them to plan this route in their head, and then simply ask them a yes or no question: would you take street X? And then they respond yes or no, they would take that street along the route that they planned in their head. The design of this task was developed to actually test a mathematical theory of how they might be able to plan over this huge structure in state space that is the 30,000 streets of London. They can't possibly just, be planning across all of the streets, all of the possible connections. First of all, that would take way too long, and these taxi drivers plan their route in about 3 seconds. At least they say they do. When you come to the window, tell them where you want to go, they think, okay, I know where to go, and then they take you there. And simply, there has to be a way for them to reduce this massive cognitive demand of this. It's actually interesting, as we've talked to a lot of taxi drivers now, they've informed us that, the most difficult routes for them are actually the shortest routes, the ones that are kind of within a local area, because those routes are actually they have the least margin of error there. They pretty much do actually have to plan the entire route from street A to street B, whereas when they have a longer journey, they're able to more easily compartmentalize that route into a series of global segments. London taxi drivers are this kind of very famous example of adult plasticity in the brain, and specifically adult plasticity in the hippocampus, which is the region that is one of the first to be impacted by the onset of Alzheimer's disease. And we're hoping that that will give us a better understanding of how this area grows before it's started to decline. And that will give us, one, just a better understanding of the hippocampus in general, but then also, down the line, whether or not doing something like this and learning the knowledge, becoming a taxi driver, growing your hippocampus, having this adult plasticity, whether, that gives you, does it give you a buffer? Does it help you prevent Alzheimer's disease? Those are questions that we don't know the answers to.
While navigational skills are clearly useful, do the majority of us really need them in a world where simple journey planning can easily be done by apps on our phones?
Every piece of technology comes with its own pros and cons, right? And having sat-nav, using Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever, it is great in the sense that it does help people who, might not be a great navigator, or you're visiting a new place. it can be very helpful in that sense. You're essentially reducing the cognitive load for yourself by offloading it to this app. But in doing so, you're not training your brain, essentially. So you're not going to learn that route.
We must definitely convince ourselves that we can't figure it out. We have a cognitive block. We often don't think we can do something. Our ability to navigate is kind of fundamental to survival. So while we think, and many people argue that GPS is kind of getting rid of that ability, everything that we've studied says it's kind of like it's born with every child, and it's a matter of merely exercising that muscle.
If you're hoping to get there, you'll definitely get there. If you're hoping to train your brain and become a better navigator, it's probably not the best way to go.
Smart design can encourage us to wayfind and strengthen our natural navigational skills. While you probably shouldn't delete those apps that use GPS just yet, it might be worth travelling a part of your next journey without it. Who knows, you might grow a hippocampus like James.
My idea of fun on a weekend away somewhere is to get myself lost and then find my way out. So I will deliberately find the back streets and then I'll work out how to get back to where I want to be, and I'm pretty good at it.